So acetylcholine is clearly present and released in the peripheral nervous system, in the PNS, because of course Otto Lowy, in his famous grizzly frog experiment, basically identified acetylcholine as the primary sort of parasympathetic, neurotransmitter. So those are cholinergic projections. However, there is complexity in these autonomic networks with regards to acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. So, again, we talked about earlier how the fight or flight, sympathetic division largely utilizes norepinephrine, right, as the neurotransmitter on target organs like the heart. So when the, sympathetic, projection to the heart, right, from the ganglion, the chain ganglion, the longer axon that works its way out to the heart and at the terminal releases acetylcholine as the primary neurotransmitter onto the heart, you get enhanced heart rate. You get fight or flight kind of responses. While the parasympathetic, autonomic output through the vagus nerve to the heart, that short axon that's postganglionic there is going to release acetylcholine, and it's going to slow down the heart rate. However, remember that for these autonomic divisions, there are CNS sources for the output. The primary neurons for parasympathetic are located in the brain stem, right, and in the sacral spinal cord, the lowest part of the spinal cord, to allow for salivation, lacrimation, urination, defecation, or SLUD, as the medical students learn, and also that slowing and energy conservation, like slowing of the heart rate and lowering of blood pressure, etc. While the primary neurons for sympathetic output are located in the spinal cord in a nucleus called the intermediolateral cell column. There's a big stretch of gray matter right down the central portion of the cord that has output to those ganglia, right? Those sympathetic chain ganglia, and then longer axons that work their way out, from neurons in the ganglia, to the heart and other organs to generate responses. So it turns out that there are parasympathetic ganglia, right, that are close to the organs they innervate, and there are the sympathetic chain ganglia. That's a step on the output from the central sources of parasympathetic and sympathetic output. And at the ganglia, the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and that's at the ganglia for both the sympathetic output and for parasympathetic output. So it means that drugs that impact cholinergic transmission, like nicotine, for example, can sometimes have rather complicated autonomic effects because they could be, yes, influencing, for example, target organ, output, selectively for parasympathetic, but they're also influencing some of those ganglionic, synapses, for sympathetic and parasympathetic. So they're often complicated sorts of responses. We'll talk about later how, in general, people's first exposure to nicotine tends to produce more of a sympathetic sort of response, although there can be stomach and nausea and all sorts of things that could be related to sort of parasympathetic activity as well, but there's often a racing heart that's associated with, initial response to nicotine at cholinergic receptors. So acetylcholine is also the neurotransmitter in the periphery wherever a motor or efferent neuron meets muscle. So if you're going to move, in any way, your body out here, right, you're going to be releasing from the motor neuron out to the muscle. You're going to be releasing acetylcholine, onto cholinergic receptors, nicotinic cholinergic receptors that are localized on the muscle and promote contraction of the muscle. So acetylcholine has a pretty broad, influence over peripheral functions, including autonomic functions, and also at the neuromuscular junction where nerve meets muscle.